Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paula Liang, Chair of Philanos. So happy to see so many of you here. Nancy, you might want to check if there's a waiting room. I heard from a couple of people who were having a little trouble getting in. I don't have a lot to say today. We'll get right to the program, but I do want to say this. As the board of Philanos is thinking long and hard about what programming we can do for you in 2021 that's going to be the most helpful. And we'd love to hear from you. One thing we're thinking about doing is a program in February as a sort of a follow-up to our Seattle conference. If your group has done something to pivot based on something that you learned in Seattle, based on a pivot based on COVID, based on Black Lives Matter, something that worked or something that didn't, but something that you think would be instructive to other affiliates, please reach out to Dale or to me. We always love to hear from you. And we'll see what turns up and what kinds of panels might be interesting to put together. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Also, if you think it's time for us to have another one of our leadership kind of Brady Bunch meetings, that more of an open forum, let me know that in the chat if you would. And otherwise, I want to turn it over to Sue Priester, our forever host of these webinars, to introduce our amazing panel for today. Take it away, Sue. Thank you.
Forever, Paula? You're starting to scare me here. Hello, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. We couldn't have a more appropriate topic for today following our historic election. But before I introduce our speakers, I want to remind you of several things. First, our Q&A will be after all the presentations, but you can submit your questions as you think of them at any time using the Q&A button. That's where I'll be looking for them. This webinar will be posted on the Philanos website in just a few days. So if you wish to view it again or share it, that's where it will be. And finally, you can continue to connect with other Philanos members on this topic or any other through the member-to-member discussion forums, also on the Philanos website. Our three speakers today will address several aspects of our topic, so let me go ahead and introduce them. First will be Helly Lee, based in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. She has over a decade of experience supporting national nonprofit and government entities which advance policies and programs impacting immigrants, refugees, and communities living in poverty. As a legislative policy analyst and strategist, Helly has worked on issues such as education, immigrant and refugee rights, health access, and nutrition. She currently serves as a senior consultant with Frontline Solutions, a Washington, D.C. consultancy serving the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. Her previous experience includes serving as the Community Relations Director of the Minnesota Department of Human Services and as an advisor to the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Our next presenter will be Jenny Eblen, a founder and current member of our Philanos member group in Asheville, North Carolina, Women for Women. In addition to her professional life as owner of the family businesses, Jenny has been an active volunteer and community leader for 40 years, focusing on children's, women's, and social justice issues and how public policy advocacy advances those issues. She currently serves as the board chair of the United Way of Asheville and Buncombe County and on the executive committee of the North Carolina Partnership for Children. Her community service honors include Buncombe County Woman of the Year and Governor's Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service. And our third presenter will be Pam Field. Pam, we see you on video right now. If you wanted to take that off, you can, or you can stay there if you wish. Pam is a member of our Philanos affiliate group, Women's Giving Alliance, WGA, in Jacksonville, Florida. Following a career in nonprofit management, which included serving as acting CEO and COO of the National Psoriasis Foundation, she retired into active volunteering. I don't know if we can count that as actually retirement. She has served as the co-chair of WGA's Advocacy Committee for 4 years and will be sharing insights into her experience there. So, Helly, the microphone is now yours, and we'll see you for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Well, first off, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And I want to thank Philanos, Karen, and Dale for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. Again, as Sue shared, I'm a senior consultant with Frontline Solutions. My name is Helly Lee. And Frontline Solutions is a Black-owned consulting firm that serves the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. I show up in my work as a child of refugees, and what that means is that I recognize that the advocacy of others, numerous others, faceless others, is how I am here today in the United States and how my family was able to be resettled here. And so the topic of advocacy and advocacy for nonprofits is very close to me in my heart because I know of how important it is and how impactful it has been for me personally as an individual and for my family and for my community. So I want to note before I start off here that I'm not an attorney and that the information I share, while legal and information that I'll be sharing, should not be considered as legal advice. So I just want to put that out there for all of you, but that I will share additional resources at the end for folks who are interested in learning more. I come to this work as again, as a community advocate, having done both advocacy and lobbying on behalf of my community in roles within nonprofit, as well as within federal and state institutions who have sought out the advocacy of community leaders and community organizations in order to do my work internally within those institutions. So I'm going to try to maneuver the slides as best I can. I wanted to start off with some definitions here around advocacy and lobbying. There's a lot of misconceptions around what nonprofits can do. I think largely some of these misconceptions happen when there's a misunderstanding of what lobbying and advocacy are. And I think I advanced one slide too far, so I'm going to go back. So I want to just start out with advocacy, and that advocacy is a larger umbrella of that includes lobbying, but it also includes a lot of other things that is not lobbying, that 501c3s or nonprofits are very much able to take part in, right? So advocacy is any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends or pleads on behalf of others, right? It includes a range of work from public education to regulatory work, litigation, work before administrative bodies, again, lobbying, nonpartisan work, right? Voter registration, census work, all sorts of buckets of work fall under advocacy. And this is a definition from the Alliance for Justice. Lobbying, on the other hand, is an effort to sort of persuade or communications that refer and reflect a view on specific legislation, right? So a lot of the work that nonprofits do falls under the advocacy category, which is fully within the ability of nonprofits to participate in. Nonprofits can also participate in lobbying as well, but very limitedly, right? So nonprofits who want to weigh in on legislation may opt for what's called a 501h election that allows for nonprofits to engage in some legislative lobbying. And I think where that gets a little bit tricky and where lawyers get involved is that rather than imposing an absolute ban on lobbying in the tax code, in the Internal Revenue Tax Code, it sets a limit. And that limit states that no substantial part of activities may be carrying on propaganda or otherwise attempting to influence legislation. And the key words here is no substantial part, right? And that can be really confusing because that's very broad language. So nonprofits have the ability um, to lobby and weigh in on legislative laws, but it's pretty limited. And there's a general limitation that is based on the size of the organization, and cannot exceed $1 million, which is a lot of money for many nonprofits that I've worked with. And in the efforts that I've been a part of, we've never been close to our threshold. So it is determined largely by an expenditure test. The extent of an organization's lobbying activity will not jeopardize its tax-exempt status, provided its expenditures related to those lobbying activities do not exceed amount specified in like section 4911 of the 501c3 tax code. So there's a sort of a chart and grid around that for those who do lobbying efforts. I want to sort of share a little bit about like an example of this difference, right? So an issue that I've been working on for over a decade now is around disaggregation of data. So I'll just sort of read out my examples to all of you. As a whole, the poverty rate of Asian Americans are similar to the broader white population at 13%, which is the lowest of all the racial and ethnic groups combined individually. But when you disaggregate the data to paint a clearer picture, you will find that Hmong Americans living in poverty are double that at 26%. We need to ensure that efforts to address poverty are informed by disaggregated data so that we can target our efforts where necessary. So that's an advocacy message. It's not specifically stating a specific legislation. It's basically educating, and it's saying, you know, this is important. It's broad. The lobbying example specifically states, same paragraph, but the last sentence is, we urge your support of Senate Bill 1234. I made up that Senate bill, which would require the collection of data, disaggregated data in programs that are aimed at alleviating poverty. So I want to just sort of show a similar message, but one is the lobbying message is about a specific bill, and that's what makes it lobbying, is that you're advocating for a specific stance on that specific bill. I'll try to move us forward. Do this here. So I want you all to think of, you know, just sort of take a pause and think about, oh, you can advance, Dale. I don't know why I don't have the screen anymore. You can think of an organization or a project that is making an impact in their community. And feel free to sort of reflect in the chat box or to yourself. I won't do like a visual here. How are they successful, and why are they successful? How are they making an impact in their communities? And you can go to the next slide. More than likely, they are advocating, right? They are advocating for an issue. They are educating folks. They are telling a story about the need. They're making a case for the communities they're serving, the issues they're serving. Anytime you are speaking to the importance of the issues that you're working on, to the community you serve, the reasons why more attention is needed to those issues in those communities, you are essentially advocating. So advocacy is done in many, many levels and many, many places, right? With your legislative bodies, within philanthropy, right? When somebody is trying to make a case for, you know, more resources in an area toward an issue or a community. We do advocacy work all the time. We advocate on behalf of our work to our board members, to our partners in the sector or in communities as well. I want folks to sort of also just pause here and think about, like, where else might advocacy be happening? I know in my household, my kids are always advocating for things. So it's happening. It's a very natural part, all this to say, it's a very natural part of the way that we do our work, especially as nonprofits who have a mission and a vision and are trying to advance that vision and mission. You can go to the next slide. And as Sue said earlier, this is a very timely conversation, right? Why advocacy? in this moment and in the movements that are happening across the country to create better outcomes for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, for women, for people with disabilities, with children, etc., advocacy is a necessary tool to educate others about your work, its impact, and especially when we're trying to create long-term systemic change in communities, whether it's at a very local level, at the state level, or nationally, advocacy is a necessary tool in order to do that, right? It is also a strategic tool that can help advance a nonprofit's mission and vision, helping to determine who you engage, how you engage them, what sort of messaging is necessary, when you need to engage them, right? If there's a bill that's passing, but you are not doing the lobbying, you're doing the advocacy component toward the movement of that bill, you can think about how do you message it in an advocacy specific way and not fall into the lobbying category, speaking directly to that bill, but still advocating part where you can educate them about the communities or your issues, right? All of that is necessary, and it is a strategic component of the work that you do as nonprofits to advance your mission and your vision. For me, as a community advocate, I've spent over a decade advocating on very critical issues affecting my communities. And it has often been done without the necessary resources because not many folks want to fund advocacy work. Because I think part of this is that, some of the results are not often immediate, right? Outside of some of the misunderstandings or the cautiousness around advocacy and lobbying, the results of advocacy work is not often immediate, right? We're looking for long-term systemic change. On the disaggregated data issue, as I said, I've been working on it for over 10 years, right? And so it doesn't fit nicely into some of the reporting boxes that funders want us to be able to show at the end of a grant program. And I think that makes it really difficult as well, because what that means is that community groups, and especially small community-based organizations and community groups, are doing this work without the necessary resources to get them toward where they need to be or the success that they're seeking, right? So they're either volunteering and doing the advocacy components of it, or they're really stretching themselves. And how you see this is if nonprofits will not have like advocacy dedicated individuals, but maybe an executive director who's already wearing 5 hats has an advocacy hat on as well. So that's sometimes how it shows up in the work of nonprofits who where advocacy is a necessary tool and a necessary to get their work and done, but is not resourced to do it. And so I think as we look forward to the necessary work moving forward to our changing systems and policy, advocacy is a necessary tool that we must more strongly support, especially in communities that are doing, community-based organizations that are doing work on the ground, right? And you all, I might be speaking to the choir here, you all know that very well. I think it's important to keep the programs that address the immediate needs, but it's also just as important to support the longer term work of the organizations. There's a slide there around some additional resources for folks who want to know more. There's a nonprofit quarterly article around Yes, You Can and You Should, nonprofit advocacy as a core competency. Alliance for Justice, where I got the advocacy definition from, also has a webinar coming up talking about lobbying and advocacy. They do these all the time. They have a 101 and a 201 webinar coming up around this topic, as well as a philanthropy and advocacy playbook that I think might be interesting to this group as well. So I welcome any questions you all have. Please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section at the end. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Jenny.
Hi, everyone. I just going to be on camera briefly, but again, I'm Jenny Eblin from Asheville, North Carolina, very involved in my community. And I'm here today because I helped with the foundation of Women for Women's Advocacy. So thank you all so much for asking me to be a panelist, and it's truly a pleasure to be back speaking to you about advocacy once again. So today I am going to be representing how Women for Women develop their advocacy, and the questions that I want to consider are, so why should a grant-making membership entity expand into doing public policy advocacy? And Helly made a really good case for that already, so I hope you're sold on that concept. And a real important issue for a membership organization is, how do you get buy-in from the membership to do public policy advocacy? And also, how do you get agreement on advocacy issues? That's actually one of the hardest things for nonprofits to do. There's a lot of resources out there on the nuts and bolts of advocacy, but to make sure you're not taking too much risk and having agreement on what kind of issues you will advocate for is very important. And also, what kind of organizations are needed when you take on public policy advocacy, and how do you build both capacity to do it and sustainability? When I use the word public policy advocacy, this really means actions taken to ultimately influence the government laws and policies and funding and systems, both locally, state, and federal, as Yelly talked about. Public policy advocacy is inclusive of education, of building public awareness and public will, and convening and collaborating with partners, and also doing lobbying. And Women for Women has participated in all of those things. I'm not able to move my slides, Dale. Thank you. So just a brief information about Women for Women. We were founded in 2004, and we are part of a community foundation of Western North Carolina, which serves about 18 counties in Western North Carolina, and they're predominantly very rural counties. We have given about a little over $4.1 million in grants since 2006, and we began our formal advocacy work in 2009. And we are focused on our mission, which is to improve the lives of women and girls through collective giving. And this mission is actually kind of our focus area now, with some guiding principles to help direct grant making, and, as you'll see, our advocacy work. Still don't seem to have control. Thank you. So I think that Yelly did a really good job of talking about how significant doing advocacy work is. She used the same sentence that I'm about to use, that it really can further your mission by addressing sustainable change to social systems. And, you know, there's a really good kind of allegoric story about what it means to work in social systems. Y'all might have all heard it before. It is where we talk about where we see a lot of folks coming down the river, drowning in the river. And nonprofits are really good about using their direct services to get those people out of the river. But if you looked forward, if you looked up the river to see why the people are in the river and what could we do to prevent that from happening and do that something, then that would be changing that system, that problem. And public policy advocacy is one of the tools to help make these changes. So it definitely affects larger segments of the population for longer periods of time. More specifically, it also will help our grantees leverage resources in the form of public funds, and also benefits in the form of changing public policy. And what we found in our advocacy work, it also has really built the relationships with our grantees and our community and other advocacy organizations, both in our region, statewide, and nationally. And advocacy also, just like grant making, really deepens the members' knowledge about issues and trains members how to be very effective in using their influence and their voice. Can you move it forward, please? So how did we get buy-in from our membership to do public policy advocacy? First of all, we had some leadership in Women for Women that were already involved in public policy and were truly champions. And they brought together membership and talked to them about the benefits of advocacy, which helped us create a task force to start talking more about how we could develop an advocacy process. And we took 2 years to really do a deep dive into understanding advocacy, to understand who were other folks in the community that were doing it. And we attended seminars. We just did a lot of research. So we really put some time into this. We also adopted a values-based advocacy model, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more, that really helped ensure that the membership understood what we were doing and got buy-in to doing this work. And of course, we were transparent and kept our membership informed at all phases of our process and bringing it forward. Next slide. So this is a graph to kind of illustrate public values-based advocacy. It started with our mission. That was the foundation of all of our work, as it is in our grant making. And then we developed some organizational values. And again, these are just fundamental, broad, intrinsic values, standards that are acceptable by all of our membership, and they conceptually unite the group. And then from our values, we adopted principles. And principles were more propositions that served as a foundation for a system or a belief or a behavior. It was a chain of reasoning. So it was really taking our values and thinking about them more as an action statement. And finally, you talk about the policy directions. And this, again, is based on your mission and your values and your principles, but it also gives you specific guidance on determining what advocacy issues would be acceptable by your organization. And it may be influenced by the nonprofit's clients, and it could also need to be sure that they can be framed around public policy advocacy. Now, the reason that values-based advocacy is so significant when you're working with a membership is it provided a consensus on broader concepts, on our values, and then we were able to build agreement on what could eventually be the specific issues, which is the advocacy agenda at the top of this pyramid. The advocacy agenda would be an annual agenda that your organization is going to work for public policy. And again, it might just be public awareness and education, or it might specifically be working and collaborating with partners and doing lobbying work. And it also, I'm not finished there yet. I'm sorry. It also helps steps along the way to get approval from larger audiences. It creates a check-in for long-term and future advocacy, because now that this has been incorporated into our work, even when volunteers leave, we still have these values, principles, and policy directions established. And it also is a really wonderful way to frame your messaging. And messaging is so important when you do public policy work. And you also start understanding who your partners are that can potentially build coalitions around these principles and policy directions. Okay, now you can move forward. Thank you. So this is an example of, after doing that work, what we came up with. You see what our values are. Probably many of you all have these same values. And then we talk about our principles. And again, our work is around women and girls. So you'll see that it's very much focused on that. And then our policy directions are the directions that we could potentially do advocacy work on. And I think I listed these three. These are not, there's multiple other ones, because this is work that we have done. We have supported initiatives that help economically disadvantaged women. We have supported initiatives around ensuring safety for women. And we've also worked on ensuring that women have educational opportunities in our advocacy work. Okay, next slide, please. So that was the how and the why. Here is the what. So how did we create the capacity along with our grant making? Because you can see that we're a fairly small giving circle to sustain advocacy work. First of all, after the task force was formed, after we got our values and principles approved by our membership, we created an advocacy committee, which is a standing committee of Women for Women, and the chair of it represents us on the steering committee. So we institutionalized ourselves into the organization and the work that we do. Also very critical is we developed an advocacy manual, and it's like a 15-page manual that really talks about our processes, our guidelines, and how we make decisions about creating our advocacy agenda. And it's so important to do this because volunteers do come and go. And if you have something formalized in place, then there's like a book to help lead future advocates and Women for Women. So this was a critical piece, and it's changed. It's not. It's been a little fluid as different folks get in there, and maybe some of the other decisions with Women for Women have changed too. Also, we've started working more with our membership and our grants committees to host biannual education events, which are aligned with bringing in new members and also expanding on some of the work that the grants committee is doing. But basically it's about what some of the critical advocacy issues are. And what's very important here is that we've worked with our grantees and our advocacy partners to learn more, and we've tweaked the process. I think one of the things that is most important to learn about doing this work is public policy advocacy is all about collaboration. You do not have to be the issue expert or do all the lead work on advocacy. You can be a very successful advocacy group by understanding what organizations are doing public policy advocacy in your community or your region, by understanding that other people, lots of times our grantees, are really the ones that understand the issues and understand what public policy is needed. So you can simply just be there to support them. But to have a Women's Giving Circle be part of the collaborative work of public policy advocacy is a huge benefit to many of our local and regional nonprofits. Okay, so if you are interested in doing public policy, what I would suggest your next steps are, first of all, if you are part of an initiative of a larger group, you need to make sure you have their buy-in. You need to evaluate your organizational capacity. We only have one part-time staff person, and they are not very involved in the advocacy at all. It truly is volunteer driven. It's really driven within that committee. You need to make sure you have the membership buy-in, and hopefully Helly and I have made a good case of how you can make so much more impact if you look upriver and see what's causing some of the issues that your community has to deal with. It also really helps you build partnerships in the community, and that's so important in our work. You will develop a sustainable process, and I would think that our advocacy committee would be willing to share our manual that I spoke to you about. And then you also need to make sure that the issues that you are dealing with or that you fund with your grant making are issues that can have input from advocacy. Not all issues can. Some of them just are not timely at the time. They're not relevant to do public policy work, but many of the issues that I think our giving circles and funds do work with issues, some of the ones that Helly spoke about. And then if you do, after years of putting this all together, and I don't mean for that to sound like a bad thing, then you will be able to create an annual advocacy agenda. And it would be, ours is approved by our steering committee, and then the work begins. So I just want to say thank you and goodbye, and I hope I get to talk to you more in the Q&A. Thank you. Now I am passing it on to Pam.
So the Women's Giving Alliance is an initiative Community Foundation of Northeast Florida. We're about to celebrate our 20th year of giving grants to improve the lives of women and girls in Northeast Florida. And the way that we do that is we identify a focus area for providing our grants. And currently, the focus area is breaking the cycle of female poverty. Prior to this, we focused on mental health, and both of those informed what we were doing with our advocacy program. So as we prepared for our advocacy program, and you heard some really good information, we had to decide that our advocacy efforts would complement and extend our existing work, and recognize that our grantees don't have the bandwidth to pursue advocacy work. So this was a way for us to be more valuable to them in addition to the grant dollars that they were receiving. We heard from Helly about acknowledging political involvement as advocacy, and it's different from lobbying, and that is something that we keep throughout all the work that we do. And finally, getting members on board, and we heard about that too, that understanding what advocacy is and why it's important, and making the case that it's not scary. So we got started small. We just put our toe in the water, and we spent a lot of time concentrating on our planning efforts, making advocacy part of our organizational goals with realistic outcomes, being transparent in everything that we did. And when we moved from the planning stage to action was when we took our first visit to Tallahassee, which is the capital for the state of Florida. So when we went to Tallahassee, we had two goals. One of them was to, and this continued from the first visit on. The first goal is to acquaint our legislators and their aides, who are important in the legislative process, with the Women's Giving Alliance. We talked about our mission. We talked about our programs. If there was a program that was in the legislator's district, we talked about that. We also talked about our desire to work with them when it was appropriate, and to be a resource to them if it was something that we could work together. And then secondly, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this, is referencing a particular bill that was consistent with our mission and our focus, and something that we wanted to talk to them about. I'm missing some of my slides. Did I skip? No? Okay, well. Okay, well, we started, I have a slide, but I'm not sure where it is, so I'll just tell you, we went to Tallahassee for the first time in 2016, and we partnered with the Dolores Barr Weaver Policy Center. We also did that in 2017, and we took a bus to Tallahassee, and we had a partner there, the Children's Campaign. And when we got there, the Children's Campaign had made appointments for us, and they gave us a very good orientation about what to do. And the most important thing that they did for us is they were our guides that day, because there are two buildings, one for the House, one for the Senate. There are elevators that only go to certain floors. There are stairways and corners that you would never find unless you knew where the door was. And so we were really dependent on them for the appointments and for the great guidance that they provided. Those 2 years, we talked about a program that was in the Attorney General's budget to provide some support for, it was called Open Doors, and it was a program to support victims of sex trafficking. And so that was our introduction to Tallahassee. We took a bus over there, we took a bus back. And it is, by the way, about a 3-hour drive. So it's, the legislators realize that we're putting some skin in the game because we've gotten there. In 2018, the issue that we were talking about was setting a minimum age for marriage in the state of Florida. We were one of only a few states that did not have regulations about what age a girl could be to marry. We scheduled our own appointments this time with our legislative delegation. And also there was a bill in the House, a pending bill in the House and a pending bill in the Senate. And we scheduled appointments with the sponsors of those bills. And one of the points that I make is it's important to remain flexible, because that was the key to that whole day. So as we went around to our appointments, and we heard that the bill was not going to get out of committee. But when we talked to the sponsors of the bill, they urged us to please go and talk to the rest of the committee members who were not necessarily our legislative delegation. And so we scrambled while we were in Tallahassee, we scrambled around to make appointments with the other legislators. And we were in the right place at the right time as we delivered the message about how important it was to have a minimum age for marriage, because otherwise young brides could be the victims of abuse if they were marrying someone who was quite a bit older than them. And so as it turned out, the bill went to the committee the next day, and they reviewed it with some amendments, passed it on to the full legislature where it was passed. And we now have a bill that sets the minimum age for marriage in the state of Florida. That was a huge win for us. That particular trip, we moved from it being a bus trip to going the previous night, spending the night, and having more time for meetings, which was very beneficial as we were scurrying around that day. In 2019 and 2020, our issue was affordable housing. The state of Florida designated a trust fund called the Sadowski Trust that was designated in 1990. But for the last many years, 15 plus years, when it's come to needing revenue, they've swept money from that fund and put it into the general revenue. So when we were there talking about affordable housing in 2019, we were told, you're not going to get anything, and we didn't. But then when we went again in 2020, by now, the governor had recognized the importance of affordable housing, and it was in his budget, and it was fully funded in the 2020 session. So between those two sessions, one of the things that we did was we scheduled meetings with our elected officials during their summer break in their home offices, and they had encouraged us to do that. What they didn't tell us was that many of them were going to be on vacation, and so actually getting the appointment wasn't quite as easy as we thought. But we did make it around to 3 of our 15 legislators, and we were able to talk with their aides. And when we went to see the legislators in January of 2020, we were able to meet with the legislators and not their aides, which was a big success for us, that they thought that we were important enough to meet with us in person. The other success we had that day was that our Senator Aaron Bean was on the Senate Committee for Health and Human Services, and he invited us to the committee meeting, and in front of the 100+ people who were there, he introduced us and gave us a glowing recommendation. So we were, the Women's Giving Alliance was not just in front of our legislators, but now we were 100 more people. The top right photo is us talking with Senator Aaron Bean, and the bottom photo is our whole group with a representative that many of the women, that is their representative. And we normally go in groups of 2 or 3, but because so many of them knew him, we went as a whole group. And our goal, and this is not our only goal, but the goal was stated as communicate with 90% of the state delegation, sharing the focused research and programs of the Women's Giving Alliance, which we have met very nicely. A couple of best practices to talk about, of course, training. Every year we do training with the whole advocacy committee, talking about the difference between advocating and lobbying, and many of the things that were talked about by Helly earlier today. And we also do training in advance of our trip to Tallahassee, because it's important that everybody is on the same page with the talking points around what to say about Women's Giving Alliance and what to say about our issue. So that becomes an important part. The picture that you see here is this is us at breakfast before we go into our meetings. And we've got our meetings scheduled in advance. We've got the folks who are in that person's legislative district attend those meetings. And this is a time for us to discuss what we're going to say and who's going to say it and how we're going to present it based on the legislators' interests. And so here we are, bright smiles early in the morning. Another best practice is communications, making sure that everybody on the committee knows what's going on with us. The Community Foundation knows what's going on. The steering committee of WGA knows what's going on. Of course, nonpartisan, and making sure that we all adhere to that. And then words matter. So when we go to talk about affordable housing, we live in Northeast Florida, which can be fairly conservative because we're right under Georgia. And when we go in to talk about affordable housing, the notion that a woman could get out of poverty by affordable housing is not probably something that's going to resonate with the legislators, but talking about affordable housing in economic development terms is something they can understand. So I live in Nassau County. We have a large Ritz-Carlton hotel and an Omni property that require thousands of low-wage workers who absolutely cannot afford to live in Nassau County. And as a result, the Omni and the Ritz have to send transportation, send buses out to pick up workers at the interstate to bring them in, at a cost, and a cost to hire and replace all of these workers. And so the notion that if people could work and live in the community because of affordable housing resonated a lot better with our legislators. And so what are we going to do next? We are going to schedule more visits at home offices with the elected official or their aides, who are also very important. We've identified task groups to track 4 issues: affordable housing, mental health, job training, medical and family leave. And so we have 2 to 3 members of our committee that are each looking at those issues. They're, focused in on one issue, looking at what legislation might be coming available in those issues, what's going on in the community, and helping us prepare for what we're going to do next. As our committee grows, because we're really at the moment only about 12 to 15 women, we will begin including some city and county elected officials and doing some work around what's going on in our cities. And we are 6 counties, so it's a bigger area than just Jacksonville. The last thing I leave you with is don't get discouraged. This is slow going, and acknowledge your small achievements because they are very important. And so now I'm going to hand it back over to Sue for questions.
Okay, thank you. And would you all of our presenters, thank you to you all, and put yourselves back on. And I especially want to thank Karen Holly, who is a member of our Philanos Webinar and Education Committee, for arranging and working with our speakers today. Lots of great information. I want to start with actually a comment, a question that came in from one of our members in Baltimore, who said that they put out their opportunities for advocacy for members who have opted into those, and they found that emails were not welcome about that from some of their members. So obviously they kind of have a split approach here. Any of you, would you respond to that? How did reluctance to begin and continue advocacy work, how did that express itself in your groups, and how was it handled? Pam, would you like to start with that one?
Well, as I said, our committee is about 12 active people out of a group of close to 500. So I think you just take the people who are interested, and we continue to get, as we get new members, we talk to them about what committees are available. And so, it's not for everybody. And I think it's important for us to know that.
Okay, and Jenny, other questions on that? How has there been reluctance, and is it strong? Has it been strong enough to derail some of your efforts?
Yes, because I talked about the values-based advocacy, and we got our values and our principles and our policy directions approved. But there were some members that were not supportive of this, and we lost a few members, but we also, I think, gained many more. We do send out action alerts to our membership, and people can opt out of receiving those. But we've had very few people do that. And that would be a specific thing like, earned income credit was coming up for a vote. Please call your legislator and, voice support for that. So generally, I think that it's so fundamental to our work now that I don't ever hear about any opposition anymore.
Okay, that's interesting. Pam, I think you mentioned, and I'd like to get Jenny's input on this too, that you communicate with your community foundation. So both of you are closely attached to your community foundation. Jenny, would you comment on that? You've got a large community foundation there in Western North Carolina. How important is that, and how is that handled?
Well, first of all, our community foundation was supportive. They do a little bit of advocacy, very strategic, mainly around charitable giving and things like that. But they did, Kelly mentioned an H election, and we do have an H election at our foundation. So that made it easier for us to do our work because you don't have to track all the volunteer hours. So they were supportive. They continue to be supportive. When we first started our work, we had to, the steering committee of Women for Women had to let the board know what we were doing. But I think that trust is built now, and they kind of like understand that we are following a process that's going to make sure that we are not doing really risky advocacy work.
Okay. Pam, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, we had to get the Board of Trustees of the Community Foundation to sign off when we first started this, and sign off on what they know that we're going to Tallahassee. We have talking points that we have published, and they need to see those and make sure that they're consistent with what their goals are. So we have to build in that into our timeline because it's a critical part of getting approval for what we're doing.
Can I add something, Pam? The other thing I wanted to say was that another outlet for advocacy that I used when I was president of WGA was op-eds. I could get an op-ed published, but it had to be cleared by the board. And it had to relate to whatever else, the specific thing we were advocating for. And I, once was asked to write a letter to the governor. And that was also had to be cleared by the board. But it's another route to consider for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask Helly, this one to you. What would you recommend as being the most productive strategies for groups like ours engaging in advocacy? I'm thinking, because you mentioned several places where that takes place, collaborating with nonprofits, other funders, or direct contact with government entities. And at what level? Pam talked a little bit about how they had been focusing on their state level and then working down to the county and city level. Can you give us some guidance on that?
I'm going to give you a very consultant-like answer right now, because I think it really does depend on the organization, the culture of the organization, what the work is trying to do, who you're trying to engage, right? And so in a lot of the work that I've been doing is engaging those who are directly impacted, folks who are not daily involved in policy work, to be excited and engaged in policy work. And for us, that means at the legislative level, both nationally and at the state legislature as well. I think those, it's hard to sort of bucket them because people don't live in those silos that we tend to like to bucket them into. And so they're affected by all of these things. But I think with policy making, because it's at the forefront. The policy making work is at the forefront right now, and people are so excited about that work that's where my heart really lives. And I'm very biased in that perspective. But I think from what you all have shared also, there's some advocacy to be done within communities around the importance of advocacy as well, right? And building trust within those communities in order to do those advocacy. And so I'll just share that much. I could go on for a whole while on this.
Well, yeah, and I might be able to answer this for you, Helly, but do you predict that more nonprofits and funder groups will undertake advocacy? We have to look ahead, 5 years from now. Do you think there'll be more of us doing it?
I sure hope so. Because there is certainly the excitement for it from the community and organizational levels, as well as we're looking at creating long-term systemic change.
Okay. I want to ask another question. We're getting toward the end of our hour, but both groups that we had today, WGA and the Women for Women, you both have, let's say, a clearer focus on what you support, women and girls. Many of our member groups do not have that focus. How important has that been, that clear focus area, been to getting support for your advocacy efforts? And do you think groups that are more generalist in their approach would have a harder time, or can you give us some suggestions on how to do that?
Well, I'm going to say that the focus on women and girls is not just for advocacy, it's a tremendous boost for our membership. Recruiting new members, women are engaged when you say we focus on women and girls. And so for our advocacy work, it just is enhanced by it.
Yeah, well, you've pretty much selected the people that are going to buy into your advocacy efforts. Jenny, do you have anything to add on that one?
I don't really have enough information about what the generalist approach is. I can tell you that in our work, we went for more specific focus, because for the past, 6 years, we were focused on women and girls living in safe environments. Mm-hmm. And now just recently, we have gone to just any issue that can support women and girls in our community. So, but that sounds like that's a bigger focus than some of you all have. But our advocacy does align with our grant making. So whatever grants they're making, if it's something that potentially public policy advocacy can impact, then they can, I'm sure there's some real specific things, that they are dealing with their grant making that would have much better impact if they advocated.
Right. If I could just comment on what Jenny just said, one of the ways WGA figures out what their advocacy agenda will be for the year is to ask our grantees, what's your advocacy agenda for the year? And sometimes we hear the same thing from all of them, and sometimes we hear different things. I would think a general, a group that grants in 5 different areas, but in the same community, would hear some of the same things.
Yeah, and of course, what issue doesn't affect women and girls? We've got a pretty general focus with that. I think we've come about to the end of our time here. I want to thank you all so much. This has been helpful and inspiring, and a good way to wrap up at least the webinars for 2020. Our next one, you can see it here on the slide, will be the power of thinking small, getting large impact from small grants, which will be in January. So in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, think positive, keep living, keep learning and giving, and enjoy your holiday season. We wish you all the best. Thanks very much.